CBS reportedly gave Tony Romo an intervention before the season about his analysis. Now, this is an interesting story that came across my desk. So I've been pretty critical of Tony Romo this year. I've been pretty critical of announcers in general the past year or so, especially the ones that just don't seem to get it and don't seem to really care or really try. So this topic is very interesting because I think it blends into the change in how people are watching sports. So we're going to listen to Colin Cowherd on the aptly named Colin Cowherd podcast on The Volume and see what Colin has to say.
Story today, and it's a story that's been simmering and been discussed a lot in the last 2 weeks on the interweb. And it doesn't really mean anything because Tony Romo makes $17 million a year guaranteed.
Before Colin gets into it, Colin with the baby blue eyes popping today. I think that's part of the problem. So these we'll call them celebrity announcers, right? These are the former athletes, the movie stars, the whatever. They get asked to do this. They're already well off financially. Tony Romo has made plenty of money in his career, right? So then he gets lumped in with $17 million a year. We've heard Tom Brady's is going to be like $30-something million a year. For me, I would take that contract very seriously, right? I would say, man, I'm getting a ton of money. I need to do this job really well. But I think for some of these athletes or some of these people in these positions, they're thinking, it doesn't really matter to me. You know, I've already made my legacy somewhere else. I was a Dallas Cowboys quarterback in Tony Romo's case. I have an NFL career I can fall back on. I've already done all that stuff. I'm doing this. If this doesn't work out, who cares, right? So I think that blends into maybe not preparing, maybe not caring as much, maybe not being like as into it as they probably should be. It's almost like a side gig. And the other part, I guess I'll just lay out my whole thing here before Colin goes. I also think these guys, they all don't like football how we think that they should or do. Just because people play football, I think we assume, or basketball, I think we assume that they love the sport, that they watch the sport, they watch the highlights, they keep up with teams, they keep up with trends and players and all that stuff and contracts. And I think the truth is they just don't. You know, I think there's a lot of players who don't watch sports, who don't watch the game. They're good at it, but that doesn't mean that they like it. That doesn't mean they're keeping up with it. And I tweeted this out this year. I said, Tony Romo, to me, sounds like a guy who does not watch very much football besides the game he's calling. And not everyone has to like what they're doing. It wouldn't surprise me at all if most players, besides their game prep, besides their tape they have to watch, if they didn't just watch games casually. That's another part of it. They may just not like it or be as into it off the field as they were on the field. So let's jump to and the last thing is how we watch the game. So before, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever, people were just watching football or baseball or basketball or whatever. They had a rooting interest sometimes. Other times they just watch to watch, or because they crack a beer, put the game on. That was like their way of ending the day, or the way that's just how things happened. Now people watch the game very differently because of gambling, because of fantasy football, because of like the amount of money, the amount of detail into these games now is out of control. People are tuned in to every aspect. Was that a catch? Wasn't it a catch? Is that call going to be reversed or not? This is a huge play. I need to know this. I need to have all the information. This guy's hurt on the sidelines. I have him on my fantasy team. I need immediate updates. Why are these sideline reporters not telling me? Why aren't they doing their job? Before it was like, man, he banged up his knee. Damn, I hope he comes back and plays. But you weren't begging for information on whatever player's ankle or whatever player's hamstring. You weren't begging for that information because it didn't impact you that much. So when you have an announcer who isn't as involved as you are, I think it's frustrating for the viewer. The viewer wants their announcer now to tell them, should the coach take the timeout? Should they go for it on fourth down? Was that a catch? Why? What's the actual rule? Be an expert. They don't want to be entertained. That's over. The entertainment world of watching sports for a lot of people is over. They're not there to be entertained. They're there because they have a cold, hard interest in what they're watching. So the Tony Romos and the people like that, I think, are being phased out. And we're going to eventually get more of these like hyper analytical experts who also can talk. There's going to be, you can still have high profile announcers, but they're going to be vetted to where they know what the hell they're talking about. They know what they're seeing in and out, and they can translate it to the viewer.
But Andrew Marchand, on his podcast, a New York Post radio TV critic, media critic, had said that CBS was getting concerned about Tony Romo's sort of unconventional style, undisciplined style. And there's been slippage with Tony Romo. And
He's
I thought,
been terrible.
For no other reason than, because I don't talk a lot of media, but I've been doing this for 30 years. And I thought, this is an interesting thing.
Colin would be great to talk about this. Obviously, he's about to for 11 minutes. But because he's at the top of the industry, he knows the top of the top, right? He's been at ESPN. He's been at Fox. He's done his own thing. He knows what it takes to be at that level of media. But he was not a former athlete. He was a tried and true media guy. He got to where he's at all through media. So I'm interested to see how he kind of sees this from the media side of things while simultaneously knowing what it's like to work with high-profile athletes and high-profile media members.
I think for the audience, it's kind of instructive. So when you get out of the NFL or NBA or any sport, but let's talk NFL and Tony Romo, who I think does a fine job. I've never really bought into the hype. I thought predicting plays was kind of silly and overrated. It doesn't mean anything. The media freaked out. I don't care. That's not why I watch you, to predict plays. I look for insight that I wouldn't get, interviews I wouldn't get, information I wouldn't get elsewhere. So, and that's why I think Greg Olson, by the way, is crushing at Fox.
Yeah, he's doing a good job.
So,
for sure.
When you first get out of the league, your first year or two, you're generally the most familiar with the league.
I think Colin's about to get, he's about to get to what I was saying. One of my first points was that Romo probably has other stuff he wants to do. He's detached from the league. Romo's a hell of a golfer. He probably spends a lot of his time golfing. He probably spends a lot of his time doing all kind of stuff. He probably doesn't spend a lot of his time watching the Jaguars and the Titans. He probably doesn't spend a lot of his time scrolling through Twitter, reading what Ian Rappaport or Mike Florio has to say.
But the NFL, two things are happening. Number one, there's younger general managers in the NFL, and they are trading players without a concern. And if you look at the average NFL career, which is about 4 years, the league turns over about every 3 to 4 years. So a guy like Romo can come out of football, have a real understanding of the personnel, the rosters, the coordinators.
The game, the way the game is played.
And then all of a sudden, some of those coordinators leave, go to different places, go to college football. The rosters turn over 3 or 4 years later, and you really have to do your homework. Yeah. And the knock on Romo, and I'll get to this more in a second, is that he doesn't really put the time in.
He does not. You can tell by the way he watches. He shows up. This is just how it seems to me. I mean, I don't know the guy. He shows up. He's ready to roll. He's calling it live. He's calling it on the fly. He's calling what he's seeing. He's done no research on the players, no research on the teams, and he's just letting it rip. To Colin's point, too, in the last couple of years, the NFL has changed dramatically analytically. It's changed dramatically with how they play the game. 4 years ago, every team had a fullback. 4 years ago, fourth down, going for a fourth down was crazy. Things like that happen now regularly. Formations, the strategies, all that stuff has changed. And if you're not paying attention to that, you may sit there and wonder, like, why the hell are they going for it on fourth down? Why aren't they kicking a field goal? When that's been kind of the trend for a year and a half now. So I think Romo's behind roster-wise. I think he's behind with the game itself, and that's a terrible combination when you also don't put the work in.
So networks get really, really frustrated when they pay you a fortune, they put you on their number one event, and you're not prepared. So Romo makes $17 million a year. That's been reported. And if you consider that Jim Nantz talks for more than half of the broadcast, sideline reports, commercials, the game itself, Romo's probably talking for 25 minutes once a week. They want you to be really, really dialed in for that 25 minutes. I'm on the air 15 hours a week, ad-libbing with no game, just talking. You're going to make mistakes. Charles Barkley, by the way, doesn't follow half the league. When the Lakers made a...
But Barkley is not supposed... So that's a great example of the difference. Barkley is not calling the game action. Barkley is calling the, whatever you want to call it, the studio show or the pre-show or the post-game show, whatever. Most of his job is to be kind of funny or to be genuine or to be in the moment. They want Charles Barkley to be like, the guy sitting on the couch with you watching a game. They don't want Charles Barkley to be breaking down half-court sets and what teams are going to do out of the timeout. They don't want him to do that. They have other people to do that. Romo probably should be in the studio. He's a charming enough guy, all that stuff. He's got the riz, as the youth like to say. He probably should be in the studios. He shouldn't be trying to tell me why a team is running the ball on 3rd and 3 versus passing it. He probably shouldn't be telling me when a team should burn a timeout. Oh, there's a 2.5 minutes left. Should they take the timeout before or after the 2-minute warning? That's what we want now in a broadcaster during the game.
Acquisition or a trade recently for a wing from the Wizards. Shaq had never heard of him. He covers the NBA. So Shaq, Barkley, television's entertainment. Harry Carey was a legend. He was drunk on the air at various times. But football is different. You get 20 million viewers. It really is the most important broadcast, singular 3.5 hours weekly for networks. And if they're paying you $17 million and you're talking about 20 minutes a week, they want you to be dialed in. I always had this theory that, and I used this for years, when I would interview people and I was going to hire them, if I had lunch or coffee with them, I always asked them if they loved golf. Oh, I love golf. Do you love golf? And if they said yes, I wouldn't hire them. Because I always had this theory that as guys age, many of them get addicted to golf. They're on PGAtour.com. They're putting in the backyard. They're thinking.
I mean, am I the best or am I the best? 5 minutes ago, mentioned the Tony Romo golf thing, and here we are. I mean, sometimes I even surprise myself.
Get about it at work. They're scheduling a trip to Scotland, and they lose sight of their other job. Romo wants to be on the tour. He literally wants to be on the tour.
He's
what's
a
the
great
first
golfer.
thing Aaron Rodgers does in the offseason? He goes and golfs. He loves it.
So Gareth Bale was a big-time soccer player. Played at Real Madrid, played at Tottenham, played in the MLS. And a big knock on him when he was playing in Real Madrid with Cristiano Ronaldo and the best team in the world. The big knock on him was that he loved playing golf and that his teammates thought he cared about golf more than soccer. And from what it sounds like, he was playing as much golf as he was practicing soccer. And then immediately when he gets done, he's playing in all these pro-ams. He's playing all over the place. He came to the MLS for half a season, retired. Next time I see him is in the pro-am last week. So I'm not saying Colin's right, but there was something there.
Both, by the way, great golfers, especially Romo. But I've always felt like Tony Romo is one of those guys, and we all have somebody in our social circle like this. They got the golf bug. He's had it for 15 years. Tony wants to be on the PGA Tour, but he likes the paycheck at CBS. And I don't think he does a bad job. I think he's fine. I think
he's phoning it in. He's phoning it in for $17 million.
Initially, Romo was overvalued with predicting plays. That's not why, I mean, if you did it once in a while, it'd be great, but that's not why I'm watching you. But when you're only talking about 20 minutes a week on the biggest broadcast for a network where they pay billions of dollars annually, they want you to be dialed in. And I'm never going to criticize somebody because they slip a word up or, mispronounce a name. Live TV is really easy for people who've never done it.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff happens. I'm not saying I'm a professional, but I do it here, where I'll say Justin Herbert when I mean Justin Fields, or a word won't happen, whatever. Like it just, when you're in the throes of a conversation, it just happens. It happens in real life. When you're talking to a friend, you may say something and they're like, wait, what? Who? And you say, wait, did I say Mark? I meant Kevin. Very normal. That's not Romo's problem. Romo's problem isn't the slip-ups. Romo's problem is that he just flat out doesn't seem to know.
Romo and Jim Nantz have producers in their ears and directors in their ears, and they've got action and they've got ads to read. It's not easy. But, I don't think, when I listen to Greg Olson, he sounds like he's been studying for that 3 hours for 6 days. Romo sounds like sometimes, and he's entertaining, he's winging it. And again, I think Barkley and Shaq wing it. But the NFL is different, and people love Barkley and Shaq. But it's the NBA. There's 82 games. It just doesn't matter. They're on the air for hours every week.
The thing that is killing Romo right now, this is another part of it, is that it's one thing to just not know, or to be kind of a goof, or to be dumb, or something like that. The problem with Romo is that he's flat out getting stuff wrong. And when you are saying something that's just wrong in front of 20 million people in the social media era, where they can go on Twitter and just completely destroy you, and then the next week you say something wrong again, that's what's killing Romo. The AFC Championship game last year, or 2 years ago now, is the big one that started Romo's downfall. When he told whoever it was either Buffalo or Kansas City, but he said it was a 3-point game, and he was like, they should probably let him score here. And everyone, it was just one of those things where you hear it, and the thought is like, the only way someone could say that is if they just have no idea how the game is played. And that, once that happened, that really kind of ended it for Romo, because then people started paying attention that he just doesn't really know what's going on. He doesn't know the game strategy. He doesn't know the game theory. He doesn't know what teams should be doing. He has no clue with timeouts. He has no clue with end of half or end of game or why teams are doing whatever. And when that's the case, when you can't trust your broadcaster to be telling you the truth, or when you can't trust that they know what they're talking about, that's a real bad spot to be in.
Nobody's losing any sleep if they don't know something. I mean, again, they make fun of Barkley not knowing players in the NBA. But those NFL windows, man, those analyst jobs, those networks don't want to pay those guys $17 million a year. So they sit there with a microscope, and you make a mistake or they think you're not putting in the work, they're going to leak stuff. This stuff gets out. By the way, Marchand said CBS attempted an intervention. That only gets out because CBS wants it out.
I think that happens a lot. We've talked about that here in other videos, but I think teams, even pro teams, I think teams leak stuff about their own players. I think the Cardinals leaked that Kyler Murray was not studying game tape or whatever, just to nudge him a little bit, just to let him know, like, hey, people are talking about this. Like this, people are expecting this to be a thing. Make sure it's not a thing. That happens all the time, I think. Those little, anytime you hear something like that, like Colin's talking about, where the only way that someone could know would be from the inside, anytime that's a story, I'm not talking about like, LeBron James was spotted at Nobu Steakhouse. Like that's a public thing. But if it's like LeBron James rumored to be a sloppy in the locker room or something like that, or whatever, that's coming from the inside. That is being leaked because whoever hopes that the player who it's about changes something.
In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Romo's agent calls CBS and asks for CBS to release a statement denying the report. Wouldn't shock me.
I think it's incredibly interesting the way that sports media is changing, the way that people view sports is changing, the way that it's same with ESPN. ESPN, Sports Center, all that, it's not the same as it was 15 years ago. The whole highlight thing, I used to watch Sports Center every single night. Every night. I cannot tell you the last time I sat down and watched a full episode of Sports Center. The highlights are dead, right? We've seen the highlights. They're on Twitter, they're on Facebook, they're on YouTube, they're wherever. We don't need Sports Center. And we certainly don't need the analysts who aren't providing us anything. You know, the analysts who are just there to talk, that was, you know, back then it was like, hey, whoever's on, they're on. Now, there's so many voices and there's so much happening that the analysts better be damn good at something. The analysts better provide either they know what they're talking about or their personality is fantastic. But if they can't do those things, there's so many other options that the audience is just going to leave. And I made a reference to gambling and fantasy football and stuff like that. That is changing stuff too, for sure. People care about players, individual performances way more. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to somebody and they're like, man, did you see what the fourth pitcher for the Blue Jays did last night? Like, dude, it's Tuesday. They were playing West Coast. Why were you up watching an 11 p.m. Blue Jays game? You live in Mississippi. I'm like, oh, I have my fantasy team, my fantasy starter. I watch so many college basketball games that you wouldn't even know the college existed because I've got a bet on the game. And then, you know, it's like the viewer, I guarantee you, I watch more like mid-major. I watch more Ivy League than I do the ACC, 100%. I've watched Cornell probably 6 times this year. I've watched Duke maybe twice, maybe not even twice. It's just all changing. It's not it's not like the premier players as much anymore because everyone's a premier player to their fantasy football owner. It's not the premier schools anymore because every school is premier when you have a bet on that team. It's all changing. And the more information that's available, which is a whole lot, the more information people want and the quicker they want it. Sideline Reporter, same exact thing. I can't tell you how many times in the last month I've seen people crushing sideline reporters because they're not getting the medical information fast enough. And if they find out the medical information on Twitter before the sideline reporter, that is real bad. And I agree, because if that's the case, what are you doing? Back in the day, 5 years ago, all the sideline reporter had to do was like do an interview with the coach before half, after half, maybe catch like an anecdote from the sidelines. Oh, this player's drinking red Gatorade, whatever. Now, you have to be faster than Twitter. You got to be faster than social media. And these announcers, they've got to be smarter than social media. If I can get the reasoning behind a timeout on Twitter and the announcer doesn't know why they're taking a timeout, that's bad news. Let me know in the comments below, guys. Have y'all noticed Tony Romo slipping up? Have y'all noticed this kind of change in sports media? Are you watching the game differently? I know a lot of people started watching with the game on mute. They turn the game on mute, or they'll have a different like radio crew on. They'll have like a local radio crew or something like that. So let me know in the comments below what you think about this. I will have the link to Colin's video below. Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Until the next video.